My name is Terry and I'm the curator for the Logie Collection in the Teece Museum. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. Wonderful to see a lovely big crowd to celebrate the opening of fantastic feasts with us. I'm really pleased that a lot of you had the chance to go through and have a look at the new museum and the exhibition exhibition in the museum. Get my words around the right way. I would just like to take a minute to especially thank and welcome our guests from the University Foundation this evening. They are our sponsors for this exhibition, and without their support we wouldn't be able to do the exhibitions or the education program that we have for primary and secondary schools. So welcome to those of you from the Foundation this evening, and also welcome to our Philology members, our wonderful support society that really strengthen and enrich the collection, and who have actually given us a new donation which we're going to be using in the education program for this exhibition. So welcome to you all. I hope you enjoy the evening. It falls to me to do the health and safety briefing for you all. We do want you to know that we take your safety seriously while you're here in the building. Three things you need to know, very simple. First of all, if an alarm sounds and we do need to exit the building, just calmly follow the directions that one of our staff members will give you. And I'll just point out the people to talk to if you have any questions. We've got Michaela standing at the door there. Is Alice with you? Yeah. And Alice. So if you'd like to move this way so everyone can see you, and wave hello. Michaela and Alice. And of course myself. If we do need to exit the building, then we go back out into the foyer and through the main doors into the south quad, and we will look after you as best we can out there. If during the evening you need a restroom, you're welcome to find the restrooms through the foyer and on the right side of the lift on this floor. And the other thing is that because this event is being filmed this evening, we would ask that you now just take a moment to turn off your cell phones or turn them to silent, so that we don't have any ringtones going off in the middle of the film. I think that brings us to the end of the health and safety. So I've written just a few notes here. I think it's important for me to note that food is really an integral part of the way in which we express our cultural values and beliefs. Alongside language, there's almost nothing that says this is who we are, quite like our food traditions. And I think a really useful parallel for contemporary New Zealand is this bun fight that we have over pavlova with the Australians. So we really want to claim that for our own and make that part of who we are. And I think in a world where natural resources are becoming more limited and we're thinking about what the future of food means, that a show like this actually has something interesting to offer, particularly because food is so bound up with culture. The future of food really has to be based on understanding that what we eat and how we eat it is integrally connected to our cultural traditions, and that if we're going to think anew about the future of food, then we might need to actually think about who we are in relationship to food as well. And this is where the research and writing of our academic staff really has a valuable input to make, especially something like the lovely Associate Professor Enrica Sciarrino, who is our current head of classics here at the university. Enrica's research focuses on Greek and Roman socio-cultural history and the development of new approaches towards the study of textual materials and cultural practices. She's published in a number of major journals and contributed to some important edited volumes of work. And in addition to that, she's kindly contributed text for the current exhibition that we have on as well. So she's going to expand upon that this evening, and I'd like you to join me all in welcoming Enrica.
Yes, and today, before I start talking, I would like to thank my colleagues, the work here in the Art Center, all the efforts, for all the efforts that they put into this to make it happen over the last few years. All of us has used an enormous amount of time, energy, thinking to make sure that the whole enterprise would come to fruition. So it's really beautiful to see that we can still have an exhibition today, and that possibly hoping that more exhibitions will come in the future. So thank you. As a head of department, I would like to thank the curators and everybody that works here to make this place a very lovely place to work. All right, so the Romans. Well, post on Facebook and Instagram, hit us with images of extravagant food dishes, but also some very simple stuff. Some include familiar foods, other features exotic ingredients or hamburgers. This choice of food was done by my daughter. So, and that donuts had to enter into play. So as in the past, so too today, food is not just about nourishment. It is about identity, about who we are, what we believe, and how we relate to others. In the ancient world, things were exactly the same. The Greeks and the Romans had a very lively culinary culture, and just like today, the choice of food sent strong political and cultural messages. This evening, I will focus on food culture of the Romans in the mid-Republican period, in 2nd century BC, that is at a specific time of their history. So that is when the Romans actually stopped relating to the Greeks as one of the many peoples that lived in Italy and in the Mediterranean, but actually began to encroach upon the world as conquerors. At the time, the Romans already had enjoyed a well-established culinary culture and for many centuries. What the archaeological record shows is that they shared with other culture and other people that lived in Italy a similar table culture. The convivium, that's the word for the banquet, was pivotal to their life. It was so pivotal that the word in Latin for wisdom, sapientia, derives from the word sapio. And sapio means pretty much being tasty, salty, tasty, what we would say witty, but it's very much associated to the ability of giving something to life. So it is generally suggested that the Roman convivium was modeled on the Etruscan version of the Greek symposium. This Italian feast, however, different from their Greek counterpart in some important aspects. Here, just a really brief summary of what the Greek symposium was about. It starts, well, it probably started before the 7th century BC, but it is clear that it was well enjoyed from the 7th century BC onwards. You had a gallery of upper class males, and it centered on drinking wine mixed with water. Here's an example of our famous logica. That is the type of vessel that the Greeks would have used at a symposium, so at a drinking party for the lovely entertainment time, which was not entertainment as well, because the participants, there were rules of participations in the symposium, and the participants also engaged in music, which was a big part of the Greek education, and various other poetic entertainment. The one thing about the Greek symposium is that the women were present, but only as, it's very complicated, and there's a lot of studies, I'm really reducing a lot of that, but only as sort of for sexual entertainment, and they were called hetairai. The other thing is that they started to recline, or at least we're mentioning of reclining during the drinking party from the early 6th century BC poetry onwards. The evidence in Italy, or at least for what we have about Rome, for banqueting goes back to the 7th century BC. That is when the Greeks really started to make the presence more consistent into the peninsula. And one of the oldest banqueting service comes from Ficana, which is this little town here off the coast of the Latium, and it's not very far from Rome. It's like, it would be like from here to Sunday. It is a very complicated for a lot of scholars, Roman scholars, to figure out exactly how the convivium worked, at least at this early stage. But we do have, we can see that we have a strong presence and a strong link between what we find in the 6th century and the late 6th century in Rome on the Palatine. This is a plaque. They used to be painted. It wasn't this grey. And what we find in Murlo, that is in Etruria, in Tuscany. So what we see here more clearly in the plaque is a musical entertainment, reclining figures, other activities, and of course the slaves that serve around the table, and lovely dogs that grab the food that falls off the couch. In both cases, the dogs actually are probably the easiest to see. The difference between what we find in Italy and the Greek symposium, that is with what we find with the Etruscans and the Romans, is that you have respectable women actually participating in banquets. There is also, it is not made up of male equals, so you also, apart from women, you also had a hierarchy of honors. There is the place in which you sat, as we know this later, for later evidence that shows that it's a very clear, there's the guest and there's a hierarchy among the guests. The other thing is that rather than focusing on drinking, on the drinking session, the Romans focused a lot more on food. That was the big part. And another thing is that you got in the Roman world, as well as in the Etruscan world, we can gather from other paintings, entertainment was done by professionals, not the very people themselves. Of course, some would have happened, but you had professionals doing that entertainment. Here are some examples of the Etruscan president. You have here women laying. The white figures are women and the darker figures are men. That's how they distinguished between the genders. You have musical entertainment with a windpipe, and here is just a reconstruction. You also had dancing activities as well, or that's what we think that would happen at that stage. Well, we're moving on in time, and things did change. Again, before the 3rd century BC, we don't have very much in terms of text for the Romans, so we have to rely on archaeological remains. So from basically the time that I'm talking about today, for the time that I'm focusing on today, this is the time that we start getting text written in Rome. It's a very complicated issue. I've written lots of stuff about that, and I'm not going to bring it in. So we do know more about what was going on because we have more material. In the period that I'm talking about, by the 146 BC, this is when Rome conquered Carthage and basically Greece, Corinth. Rome became enormous in terms of territory. And what the consequences of these expansions was also an increased availability of resources in the city of Rome. Roman aristocrats at this point became determined to assert their supremacy on every occasion, and that was at the table too. They didn't go though about it all in the same way. Some embarked on a quest for the exotic and indulged in new culinary possibilities. The kind of things that they could flaunt at parties and to kind of assert their superiority also with their guests or other aristocrats that they were competing with. Others, on the other hand, worked on fabricating Roman authenticity by presenting farm-produced food as the source of their superiority in politics and war. So food became, at this stage, a weapon of social differentiation, and also the banquet, a sort of a battlefield for intra-elite competition. Recipes written in various forms, poetry and prose, began to circulate, possibly at banquets. So there's the possibility that some of this material was performed or read out or done during banquets. We are very lucky to have very few lines from a poem that is called Ediphagetica, the Elicacies, by Ennius, who was one of the earliest poets that wrote in Latin and wrote down things down. And we also have a number of recipes from the De Agricultura, that is a book on agriculture by Cato the Elder. These materials offer us an amazing view on how the Romans constructed, at this stage, food socially, ethnically, and geographically. Ennius Delicacies is a translation, because Roman literature begins through translation, and it is a translation of a gastronomic poem written in Greek by a guy from Sicily. This is Sicily, from Gela, actually, from a little town down there. Actually, it was a big town at the time. Archestratus wrote in the first 2/3 of the 4th century BC, so quite a while before our time. And scholars situated his work in the middle of a really lively culinary culture that happened in Sicily. Apparently, in Sicily, there was a very strong tradition of very refined foods that was cooked. The poem is written in hexameters. We have fragments, but a lot of them, thankfully, in Greek. They were written in epic meter. So he was trying to imitate Homer while writing about food. And actually imitating Homer in the way of a catalogue. That is, he made a catalogue. And he opened, we have references in the sources to the fact that he opened with the intention to present the results of his research on where to get the best food and drinks in the Mediterranean. Okay, so he's pretending to be, if people know about it, like Herodotus about the world, the Greek world. He did it about food. Then he gave instructions. He has 2 young boys that he's addressing, Moschus and Cleandrus, about acquiring, cooking, and serving a number of delicacies. His main attention is on fish. Now, why fish? Fish is either, in the ancient world, either the food of the poor, very poor, or is the food of the very rich. And why of the very rich? Because in order to fish and to get fish, you have to stay a long time at sea, you have to invest money on boats and people that man the ships, and then the lack of refrigeration makes a huge problem to maintain the fish fresh. So fish was incredibly expensive, especially if fish was fished very far away. The other thing about fish is that fish was not a sacrificial item. It was only consumed in private, and it was also used especially for conspicuous consumption, so to show off at the banquets, and it fell completely outside religious rituals or religious regulations, so you could basically do whatever you wanted with this sort of fish. It was a significant marker of social and economic status if you had fish coming from very specific regions. And this gastronomic poem that Archestratus wrote was precisely that. Okay? Now, what we have of Ennius' translation of this Latin poet, this Roman poet that decided to, sorry, I tend to move a lot when I talk. No, I'm stuck. But that's all we have of the translation for Ennius, which is extraordinary. You know, we classicists admire all the historians that have to go through tons and tons of material. We have 11 lines and we are so excited. And it is actually quoted by Apuleius, who writes centuries later. And this is the translation. We have the ability of looking at the Greek remnants of Archestratus' poem to see that Ennius has actually performed some changes. So it goes. Just don't ask me what kind of fish they are, because I kind of kept in my mind in Italian, and then I had to do it in. I just got confused. But just as the seaweeds on Clipea surpasses all others, and I'll show you where Clipea is. Clipea is right here. It's just, oops, let me see if I can, there. Most abundant Aeneas. Aeneas is over here. It took me a while to do this. Rough-shelled oysters are the beetles, which is very close. actually, I missed out Abydos, but it's actually quite close. The scallop is found in Mytilene and in Ambracian Caratus. So Mytilene would be on the other side here, and Ambracia is right on this coast, just across from the sea. In any case, here you have a map of all the places that are mentioned. The sarg is good in Brundisium. If it is big, bite, be aware that the boarfish is of the highest quality at Tarentum, so in southern Italy. And then be sure to buy the elops in Surrentum, which is close to Naples, not very far from Rome, and the glaucus in Cuman. Why have I passed over the Paroras, a veritable brain of Jupiter, the highest? It's a big good when caught in Nestor's homeland, that is Pylos in Greece. The blacktail, the rainbow wrasse, the blackbird fish, and the mager. At Corcyra, there is octopus. Well, we're getting closer to Italy then. Fat bass heads, purple shellfish, large and small, mussels, and sweet quina, which I love. Sea urchin. Now, this seems like nothing. I mean, it's sort of kind of a list of random places, but when we look at the places that are mentioned, what we get is actually something more. For example, when he refers to, say, Clypea, which is close to Carthage, that was a Greek colony that was founded in 31 BC, but was occupied by the Romans during the First Peloponnesian War. Aeneas, that is mentioned for the mussels, all right, as in the Greek version, it was actually coming around under Rome presence and became part of the Roman Empire in 133 BCE. So here is by 100 BC, there is the expansion in yellow. That is, all of the places that are mentioned in the poem are also places that are either conquered by Rome or about to be conquered. The fact is that the reason why it seems like it's really odd that you have these places, because in various places, Ennius changes the Greek original. So, for example, in so when he refers to Cumae, when Cumae is mentioned, which is quite close to Rome, well, here is, remember, for Glaucus, Cumae remained very loyal to the Romans during the Hannibalic invasion. But the other thing is, he mentioned also Surrentum, but in the Greek original, attached to the fish that is mentioned in the poem, it's not Surrentum, it's Syracuse, which is a town in Sicily. So why is he changing all this stuff? Surrentum was also very much involved in taking sides with the Romans. So what we see is that in translating the gastronomic poem, Ennius was actually remapping the whole fish world into the Roman Empire or close under the Roman dominion. So, what a later source that talks about these fragments and talks about Archestratus says that these Archestratus, and I'm quoting, out of love of pleasure, made a careful circuit of the entire earth and sea because he wished to inquire into everything associated with the belly. What we have in the Ennius version is a report not of a culinary trip, but rather a list of spoils, of sea spoils, representing Rome's control, extensive control over the empire, but also the celebration of its elite, access to all these goodies. And to get, you know, if you get, it mentions oysters and various other stuff from Mytilene, which is a little island from here, to get to Rome, that would have been massively expensive, and yet would be done. So part of the Roman elite really dug the new thing. They were really excited about these new possibilities and what they could show off and how much they could tell the competitors, oh look, I'm much better than you, I can get oysters or quinoa from this or the other place. On the other hand, but this is not the only voice that we have at this time. Cato the Censor is a guy that was present in the Roman political scene for an enormous amount of time, really, for the Romans, because the Romans tended to die quite young. He was born in Sabina. Sabina is the area outside of Rome, like it is the countryside. And he came from a local elite family, but he did not have the kind of history of achievements that a lot of the people that were active in politics had. The way he negotiated his way through it was by relying and by making something really big about where he was coming from. So in one of his speeches, he says, I spent all my boyhood in frugality, privation, and hard work, reclaiming the Sabine rocks. Sabine is like this area outside of Rome. Digging and planting those flinty fields. Right. Polybius, who is a Greek historian, writes about Marcus Cato, commenting on this extravagant expenditure that went on at the time, saying, Marcus Cato complained that one might be quite convinced of the decline of the Commonwealth when pretty boys cost more than fields and jars of caviar is more than ploughmen. Okay. In one of the pieces that Cato wrote down, it's called Carmen de Moribus, it's kind of a song about proper costume. We read in a fragment, once upon a time, horses costed more than cooks. So obviously we have, at this time, evidence of a much richer culinary culture and where food becomes a real issue. What is the right food to eat? What do you share with your peers? How do you use food to look better than others? Are you a food adventurer or you only eat fish and chips? Or no, fish and chips? No, because fish is already bad in New Zealand. Fish is not totally, it's a complicated issue with fish. But say roast, lamb roast. Well, Cato was not not talking out of nothing. He had something to turn to in the history of self-presentation. He relied on figures that were sort of legendary, and one of them was Dentatus, who the Samnites sent invoice to Dentatus and said, oh, Dentatus, come with us to help us, we have beautiful gifts and stuff. And the story goes that when they went to see him in his farm, again in Sabina, it isn't Sabina, yes, where was it? They found him roasting turnips. Yes. And the guy, what's most important, and this is it's very, very important for the way his sort of thinking, political thinking goes, he rejected the gift, declaring that he preferred ruling those who have gold over possessing himself. Which is a very clever answer there. The other guy that we know about is sort of represents a model for Cato is Cincinnatus. The Roman army was surrounded by the Aequi, which were their enemies at that moment. We're talking 458. He's appointed as dictator, and he was found working in the field, hard work. And the guy said, yes, I'll accept it, I'll be dictator, which means full power on all levels, and cleared up the situation very quickly and celebrates their triumph and goes back all that in 15 days to just be hard at work in his field. Now, these models are actually quite important because they do represent something that we sometimes miss, but it exists, and it's a very strong tradition throughout. I have here my colleague from history, and I think that the model of the farmer, soldier, farmer, and so on is really strong in this tradition. This is where the roots of that idea of the farmer, soldier come from. That's where they stand. And Cato wrote a book on agriculture, and in this book he draws on these scenarios of sturdiness and being whole, out of world, incorruptible. And in the opening sections he argues that agriculture is morally superior over usury and commerce, and then the rest is a number of instructions about harvesting, planting, everything about what you need to do. It's basically a book where if you are a Latin student, you learn how to use the imperative. It's all about giving commands. The funny part is that the foods mentioned because there has a section on dietary and medical prescriptions, are all products from the earth. There is no mentioning of fish in Cato. And that is, cabbage is the champion of all. It is the cabbage which surpasses all other vegetables. It may be eaten either cooked or raw. If you eat it raw, dip it into vinegar. You guys can learn. It promotes digestion wonderfully, and it's an excellent laxative. Yeah, we need that detail. And the urine is wholesome for everything. If you wish to drink deep at a banquet and to enjoy your dinner, eat as much raw cabbage as you wish. Season with vinegar before dinner, and likewise after dinner, eat some half a dozen leaves. It will make you feel as if you had no diet, and you can drink as much as you please. Well, if you wish to clean out your acrid digestive system, take 4 pounds, you know the amount of calories. Leaves, make them into 3 equal bunches and tie them together, set a pot of water on the fire, and when it begins to boil, sink, blah, blah. And then again, sink it and count 5 times to dunk the cabbage. I was reading, I was mentioning to Robin before, and I was reading on The Guardian that there was a joke about the Brits that said there are only 3 vegetables in the UK, 2 are cabbage. That's probably why the Brits loved Cato so much. The instructional style and the almost like lack of sophistication that we find in Cato is actually very contrived. It's not. It's a lot more sophisticated than it seems. And his attention to bodily functions is really far from being uncouth and awkward. He actually has an attitude towards food and that is strictly related to what he thinks that the Romans should be like. First of all, they need to be self-sufficient. But that fact is actually countered by one very simple thing, that the Romans never, especially Romans like Cato, never did digging and planting and sweating and doing all that stuff. They had slaves that did all of that for them. So self-sufficiency has got nothing to do with learning to cultivate the land or producing stuff. It's got nothing to do with cultivating the land, but it has to do with actually how to learn to command and give orders and make something profitable. Okay, this is one thing. The other thing is, yes, it's true that, for example, Ennius constructs the whole Mediterranean like a bit like the place where the Romans can go and get all the fishes and really nice things that they can find in the sea. But the fact is that the Cato's farm, in the farm, and how it's represented, even the Sabina, where he's from, is actually is a territory that it was the product of conquest itself. See, Cato family had been granted Roman citizenship just 30 years before he was born. So what I mean is that both Ennius, you know, the poet that writes about special foods, and Cato that talks about cabbage and urinary tract, are actually people that live in a society that has a very strong proprietorial attitude of occupying land or occupying the sea or showing the kind of ownership. The difference is that whereas Ennius' elite readers desire to indulge in the pleasure of having a world of exclusive delicacies at their table and to differentiate themselves from the other on the basis of their ability to get their hands on this stuff, Cato sort of was thinking about a paradigm of self-reliance that was supposed to limit the disproportionate differentiation between the elite, and therefore to assert that being an aristocrat meant to not to consume wealth, but to actually retain military power and to be successful at politics. And that's, on that note, I hope you're going to learn something about, well, you can take notes on the cabbage, but our curators have actually prepared a few recipes from Cato's beautiful book. Unfortunately, we don't have the parts for the recipes from the Greek, from the Greek poem and from Ennius' poem. We just have lists.
So we've got
Do you have
plenty of
questions?
So we've got plenty of cabbage.
We have plenty of cabbage. Cabbage is very good for you. The upper digestive tract.
If you want to drink deeply.
An accident.
Yeah. So we should keep it.
Yeah. Do you want to ask me questions? Do you want to ask me any questions? You don't have to. I've obviously been very exhaustive about the list of things the cabbage can do, but I invited. I love cabbage. There are a few recipes I can give you.
Have you got the recipes here?
No, I don't have the recipe here. Actually, the curators have put together some recipes, right? Did you put some recipes
There's
together?
one on Facebook, and if you sign up to our mailing list, we'll email something.
Yeah. These kind of recipes are very kind of simple. They're made on purpose to be this simple, actually. You know, it's like, yeah.
So the Greeks like drinking a lot and having fun, but the Romans are more interested in eating
Well,
and not drinking as much.
no, it's actually quite interesting. You're saying that Cicero at some point distinguished the convivium from the symposium and says the Greeks like to come together, to drink together, whereas we Roman come together to live, because convivium means to live together. So it is just a different, slightly different. It's not that the Greeks did not have food, actually, but the focus is different. Also because their also social structure of the event is different. You only had males or the peers. In the Roman world, you had no more than 9 people should have been on a convivium, at least more on historical times. And there's hierarchies, and it's quite different, but emphasis is different. I'll give you.
Do you have any more questions? Don't have to be shy. Well, if you'd like to join me in thanking Enrica for an excellent talk to complement our show,